That was a long intro. So we are we are wrapping up our Atomic series where we were talking about some different spiritual healthy habits in our life. And today we're going to talk about how we can make worship a healthy habit in our lifestyle. How many guys are super passionate about something? Like super passionate about a sport? So super passionate about an instrument that you play? Who's really passionate about an instrument you play? No one. How about creating new things like an invention or TikTok dances? Who's really passionate about TikTok videos? Some of y'all? Excellent. Who's passionate about like math? Anyone passionate about math? We have any mathletes in here? Nice. How many passionate about writing? Anyone passionate about writing? Nice. Any passionate readers? Like it's just hard for you to put down. Yeah. I love, Jen, I always see all your kids, your class, post the books that they read, and that's so awesome. I love seeing that. That's awesome. We're all passionate about something. Like, I'm overly passionate about sports to, like, a degree where it's kind of bad. But we're all passionate about something. Sometimes a little overly passionate, like some of these crazy people here on this video.
Harry, we have the camera ready. We're not going to do anything wrong. Harry, you have the camera ready. Come with me. Let's go.
Oh my God.
Harry, please. Harry, why don't you just look up, Harry? We can get the photo. I know.
Yeah, gosh. How many of y'all would do that if you saw Harry Styles? Anyone? Yeah, gosh, I don't know. Well, one of the original references was the Beatles. Anyone know who the Beatles were? The Beatles? Anyone listen to the Beatles? So the Beatles was like this original, like, fan girl. They had Beatlemania. That was like the first, like, just fans totally obsessed with a group. I feel like it started then, and then we used to see it in the 90s with NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. What up? And then Harry Styles. That's crazy. Like, the dude was just trying to straight walk through the airport, like, trying to get to a flight. Why is he wearing a Green Bay Packers shirt? Like, the dude's from England, right? He's trying to act like an American. Yeah, Green Bay Packers. Ugh, gosh. It's cool to be passionate about something. Like, I think it's super fun to be passionate about something, but sometimes the things that we can love actually become items of worship. Some of the things that we actually love and are passionate about can become objects of worship. I remember when I was in 8th grade, like I had just started being somewhat better at basketball, but like I was passionate about it. Again, I grew up in the 90s, so I love the Bulls. I love watching the Chicago Bulls play. Michael Jordan is the GOAT, but that whole team was phenomenal, and I was obsessed. Like, if anyone would try to talk bad about the Bulls, like, I would trash talk them. Like, not even try to make fun of, like, their team or try to prove my point by talking about stats and talking about championships and talking about MVPs. Like, I would just, like, make fun of them. It was bad. But I was super obsessed with basketball. Like, that was my life. And there would be times where I would, like, not hang out with my friends, or I would not do my homework, or I would not want to go to church because basketball was the most important thing to me in my life. And ultimately, I mean, that didn't work out. Like, I'm not playing in the NBA. But it led to a time where my life was a little confusing because I put basketball on this pedestal to where I would worship it. And everything else in my life kind of fell by the wayside. So like some of that examples could seem a little bit harmless. You're like, okay, so what? Like, you used to be obsessed with basketball. And like things can be pretty obsessed with that becomes more harmful. There are things that we can become obsessed with that can become harmful. Sometimes we develop these habits that lead to spending our time overthinking about something. We spend more time looking at something, spending money on something, spending time on, spending energy on. And some of those things might not be the best things for our lives at the moment or even in general. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about like these habits Some good, some bad, some might be neutral. We've talked about habits that we could add to our lives that help us grow. Right, so we talk about the habit stacking, right? And as Brian pointed out, every time he brushes his teeth, he thinks about me. It's a little weird. But it's ironically, every time I brush my teeth, I think about him. So it works out. Every time I hit my finger, I'm like, think about Brian. Oh, he's so sweet. He bandaged me up. Today we're going to wrap this whole thing up, put a bow on it. We're going to wrap up this Atomic series by talking about things that we worship. Things that we worship. We all worship something. We all do, whether we realize it or not. And based on your habits, what is something that you worship? Based on your habits, right? This whole series is about habits. What is something that you worship? Like whether it's God, Harry Styles, a sport, a girlfriend, or boyfriend, how do you know if you worship something? How do we know if we're putting so much emphasis on something in our lives that we literally worship that thing? How do we know that? When you worship something, you can usually tell through your actions. When we're worshiping something, you can tell through our actions. You might hang pictures of it in your locker. Do you guys have lockers? No? Do you doodle on your notebooks? Do you put your boyfriend or girlfriend's name over everything? Equals love forever. I put Chicago Bulls stuff on everything. When all of my binders and stuff had cool Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen stuff all over it. Maybe you talk about it a lot. Maybe that's all you talk about is this thing that you're totally obsessed with. So all you talk about is this, and your friends are like, dude, shut up. Maybe you spend so much time and energy and effort and attention on this that it's all wrapped up that you're missing out on other opportunities or other people, other relationships in your life. Maybe you even make sacrifices for this thing. Some of us even make sacrifices to this passion. God cares about what we worship. God cares about what we're passionate about. It's probably no surprise, I'm going to suggest worshiping God is a good idea. I think that's kind of a no-brainer here. But what does that even mean? What does it mean that I can't spend time and energy on anything else? Do we have to give up this hobby? Do we have to give up my sports, my interests, the things that I like? I'm not telling you to do that. I'm not saying we have to give up those things. But we can develop habits that help us give God our worship. We're going to talk about how habits can give God our worship. So there's this passage in the book of Colossians. Everyone say Colossians. Colossians. Say Colossians. It's good. So it was written by the Apostle Paul. And it can help us figure out what this word worship really means and how we can make it a habit. So Paul was this early follower of Jesus. You probably hear us talk about him a lot. He traveled all over the world sharing his faith, sharing the good news of who Jesus was and what Jesus was about. And he wrote several sermons and several letters, which we find there in the New Testament. All these letters guided believers to understand how God wanted them to live, how to treat one another, how to follow God. Some of them actually ended up here in the Bible. One of those letters was written to the church of Colossae. In it, Paul advised those believers how to live out their faith. So that's what we'll pick up here, Colossians 3, 12 through 17. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to the God, the Father, through him. Everything described in this passage is worship to God. Like maybe when you think of worship, you think of singing or praying or reading the Bible. But in this passage, Paul is literally saying that worship can be so much more than that. Worship can be showing somebody compassion. Worship can be just being a kind human being. Worship can be being humble. Worship can be being gentle, being patient, forgiving someone that hurts you. And yes, ultimately, worship can be singing songs, as we do frequently, like on Sunday mornings and during Fusion. I think that's a huge list. But in everything listed here, Paul had two very important focuses. Two important focuses: love others and thankfulness to God. And what it boils down to. We can worship God by loving other people. When we're compassionate, when we're kind, when we're humble, when we're gentle, when we're patient, and when we're forgiving with each other, it could actually be an act of worship to God. That means worship isn't just something that happens privately between you and God. Worship requires you to love someone other than yourself. Worship requires you to put someone else before yourself, someone else's needs before your needs, someone else's wants before your wants. We can worship God by loving others. That second thing is we can worship God by being thankful. Like singing worship songs isn't the only way to tell God thank you. It's one of my favorites. It's why I worship daily. I work on the way to work when I'm in my car. That's the first thing I listen to is a worship playlist that I made. I just want to start my day being thankful to God. I love singing. I love singing songs to God. But it isn't the only way to tell God thank you. Everything we do, everything we say, Paul says can be done with the spirit of thankfulness for what God has done through Jesus. The reason Paul said to never forget about love is because love is the power and the energy behind all of our worship. Love. When we live a life of worship, we pull this thread of God's love through every part of our lives. When we live a life of worship, we pull the thread of God's love through every single part of our lives. If we want to understand worship better, there's this book of the Psalms. It's in the middle of the Bible. It's a great place to go. King David is said to have written many of these songs and poems contained in the book of Psalms, and they're all songs of worship. The passage we're about to read by David, while he was in the desert of Judah, it's a song of worship that expresses his commitment to God, and it celebrates God's character. Even though David wrote many poems and songs about God, there are a few that describe how committed David was to God, like this one. We'll have it up here. I'm going to read up here because I use a different translation. I use the Christian Standard Version. I just like the wording of this one better. It says, "You are my God. I worship you in my heart. I long for you as I would long for a stream in a scorching desert." You guys ever been so thirsty that you're so quenched for water? Have you ever for like a good workout or a sporting event? Or those random things you just wake up in the middle of the night and it's like you've been feeling like you've just been living in a desert and you guzzle water down. I think it's such a good example. Like his soul feels like that. He longs for God. "I have seen your power and your glory in the place of worship. Your love means more than life to me, and I praise you. As long as I live, I will pray to you. I will sing joyful praises and be filled with excitement like a guest at a banquet." You guys ever been to a party before? Ever been to a formal banquet, like a sports banquet or like a wedding? How many of y'all have been to a wedding before? It's formal, it's fancy, right? There's a lot of excitement in there. People are eating awesome food. People are dancing. You're celebrating the union of two people. It's awesome time. I love the metaphor that he used that as a banquet. David said God was his desire above everything else in his life. I'll tell you what, David was a screw up. You can read about it. Like David messed up. He's a murderer. He slept with another man's wife and then sent that dude off to be killed. The dude was jacked up. I say that because like we live this life where we think it's so hard to put God up on this pedestal. We think it's so hard in our lives. Like we think we have to be perfect in order to have the right prayer, the right lifestyle, the right commitment to God. But every person you see God use in this book were just normal people. Just normal people like you and me. And if David can do it, I think we can do it. David said God was his desire above everything else in his life. Like, did you hear how confident and sure David was? Like, what reason did David give for all of this? Like what he says in verse 3, because God's love is better than life. God's love is better than a boyfriend or girlfriend. God's love is better than the funniest viral TikTok video or dance. God's love is better than the NCAA March Madness tournament. God's love is better than baseball, than dance, than sports. There's a lot that David is saying in here. And whether or not you believe in Jesus or started following him, think about this for a second. David says God's love is better than anything else. What are you putting before God in your life? We all do it. Students, you can look at your leaders. I'm sure they can give you a handful of things. I'll give you a list of hundreds of things. You see Chris up here on stage or Nathan up here on stage. I'm sure they can give you a list of things. There's always going to be this constant push and pull, things pulling for our attention. But we have the control of the things that we put up on this pedestal. We have control over the things that we idolize. We have the control over the things that we want to worship. No matter what else competes for your love and for your attention, trust me when I say God's love is better. It's better. It's better. It's better. And I had to learn that lesson the hard way when I was so obsessed with basketball. That took a lot of things away from my life. And I slowly had to earn back trust from my parents, from some of my closest friends, because I had isolated so many people in my life. For me, it felt like it took years for me to rebuild my relationship with God. But I know God doesn't work like that way. God's love is better. So worship is about loving God and loving others. When we allow love to be a part of everything we do, we are worshiping God. Our worship then becomes something that not only changes our life, but the lives of everyone around us. When we show others love, it has a potential to transform their lives as well. Some people don't believe that they are worthy of that kind of love. Some of us may be actually in this room. Maybe because we've never been shown that type of love. But we can worship God by loving others. When we show love to God by being thankful and giving God glory. It's not just out of obligation. When we go to God in worship, God transforms us from the inside out. This act of worship comes from this spring, something inside of us that says, God, I'm so full of joy and hope and happiness that I don't have anything else to do but fall on my knees and be thankful for you. The tiny habits we're talking about in this series can impact our lives far beyond anything we ever thought possible. So what do you think could happen to your faith? What do you think could happen to the people that you choose to love? What do you think could happen if you made it a habit to worship God with your life? What would that look like? Let's talk about it. I want to turn to you guys. Let's get creative on how you can make it a habit to worship God. But I want to think of some examples, so let's do it quickly because that might help us turn worship into a habit. How can you worship God in 2 minutes or less? How can we worship God in 2 minutes or less? Shout some ideas out. Let's brainstorm together. Do you guys have any? Pray for 2 minutes. Can pray for 2 minutes. Send a text to a friend who needs some encouragement. Sing your favorite worship song as you're getting ready in the morning or getting ready for bed or on your way to school. My favorite song right now, anyone listen to Elevation Worship? Same God, we sang it this morning. Same God. Oh, dude, that song wrecks my soul in a good way. I love it. So good. Elevation Worship, same God. Look it up. Send a message to someone at church and ask if there's anything or anywhere you can serve. And I would point you to serving on Tuesday at Matthew 25 with us. Maybe you just pray for your school, pray for your classmates as you're walking in between classes. Start a conversation with someone that looks like they need a friend. These are easy things to do, and they take no time. Like, that stuff's not a big sacrifice. And we think like, oh, I don't have time for that. Yeah, you do. You're just not making God a priority in your life. So again, like we talked about habit stacking, you already have all these habits in your life. If you want to add this new habit into your life, you want to add it to something you're already doing. So again, right, we talked about the habit stacking. I brush my teeth, so I pray, right? We drill that. Just you guys can know that. So what are those habits that are we attaching? What are those healthy habits? What are some worshipful habits that we could attach to something in our life? How many of y'all drive to school? How many of you guys drive to school in here? High schoolers, who drives to school? Okay, easy. You're already in the car. Throw on some worship music. How easy is that to do? Your habit is every time I drive to school, I start the drive by listening to worship music. How many of you guys take a bus to school? Raise your hand if you take a bus to school. All right, cool. I'm on the bus, so I'm going to have a friendly conversation with somebody that I don't know. Or I'm already on the bus, so I'm going to pray for a friend who has something rough going on in their lives right now. You already have these habits in your life. What are some easy things that we could attach to grow us spiritually? Whether you're at church, at school, walking, eating, shopping, playing baseball, doing homework, hanging out with friends, you always have an opportunity to honor and connect with God through worship. You always have an opportunity. It's just up for you to take it. Make it a habit to worship God with your life.